I woke up in a geisha house in 1600s Japan. No Wi-Fi, no Uber, just my phone glowing like a demon lantern and a dozen geisha deciding if I was fascinating or dangerous. One wrong move, and this almost got me killed. If you ever find yourself unexpectedly horizontal on a tatami mat while several exquisitely dressed women stare down at you as though you're a particularly rare koi that leapt onto the veranda, there are 3 things you should not do. 1. Panic. 2. Say konnichiwa, I come in peace, like a budget time-traveling astronaut. 3. Accidentally unleash a scent cloud of Bulgari that screams, European harbor meets yuzu orchard, across a room otherwise perfumed with agarwood incense. I, of course, did all 3. The first giggle bubbled up from behind a painted fan. Another followed from somewhere near the paper shoji, where late afternoon light honeyed the room. A woman in a soft persimmon kimono leaned closer, her hair in a flawless shimada maja tortoiseshell kanzashi catching the light like tiny suns. Gakoku no kaori, she murmured, foreign fragrance, and my heart decided to moonwalk into the Heian period. I sat up, tried to look less like a man in cargo shorts who had belly flopped into the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, and realized 2 things. 1, I'd landed in an okiya, a geisha house, home, training ground, and vault of secrets. 2, I still had my backpack and its unhelpful modern inventory. Flashlight, compass, smartphone, 38% battery, may the Tokugawa gods be merciful. Toothbrush and toothpaste. A bottle of Bulgari for men already deployed, tragically. And, like a pocket-sized ethical dilemma, a bottle of penicillin capsules. Welcome to the floating world, okiya, where elegance pays the rent, conversation is an art that earns more than gold, and I am the loudest thing since a kabuki drum. Can you sit Caesar without crying? Asked a woman whose poise could have negotiated a treaty. She was the Okasan, the proprietress of the okiya, the business mind and house mother rolled into silk. On a lacquered tray before her lay a ledger so crisp I could hear the rice paper whisper. I can do something, I said, folding my legs in what I hoped was a historically sensitive approximation of Caesar, and in reality, a crime against knees. A cluster of hangyoku, apprentice geisha in Edo, Kyoto calls them maiko, watched with the fascination one reserves for fireworks and small disasters. Their kimono were vivid but not ostentatious, thank you, Tokugawa sumptuary laws. Their faces dusted in oshiroi. Their teeth were not blackened. Ohaguro was fashionable for married women, and some samurai, not a geisha thing here, file that under useless but suddenly useful trivia. We are in Shin Yoshiwara, the Okasan said, like a queen announcing a latitude. After the Great Meireki Fire of 1657, Edo's pleasure quarter had been rebuilt northeast of the old city, encircled by moats, with the Grand Omon Gate leading to Nakanocho, the main street of lanterns. Our house entertains. We do not sell what people assume we sell. Her eyebrows did a small, lethal dance. We sell taste. Music, dance, poetry, games, the perfect joke with the perfect timing. Do you understand, Oma? I nodded vigorously. Entertainment, not entertainment. From somewhere, a shamisen thrummed, a 3-string soundtrack to my humiliation. Good, she said. Then you will not get us arrested. Rule 1. Shoes off. The Okasan watched me remove my sneakers like a hawk considering a field mouse. I tucked them neatly by the genkan entry. Tatami mats, by the way, are standardized slices of heaven, about 90 by 180 centimeters. You can measure rooms in mats, and I measured this one in 47 varieties of panic. Rule 2. Do not confuse geisha with oiran. The former are artists who practice conversation like fencing. The latter are high-ranking courtesans whose hair and robes are parades sponsored by gravity. Edo has both, but you do not confuse a tea ceremony with a thunderstorm. Rule 3. Curfew is not a suggestion. There's a temple bell. There are watch patrols. There are Machibugyo magistrates who will have feelings if they find you wandering with a glowing rectangle that screams witchcraft. Rule 4. Tip with tact. Edo runs on rice and status, and sometimes gold Koban coins. I had none of the above. I did have Bulgari. We agreed to pretend it was distilled Portuguese citrus from Nagasaki. Everyone survived. "Say something charming," said a geisha whose name sounded like drifting snow. Yuki. Her eyes were amused. "You smell like a foreign prince who got lost." "I smell like I offended a pine forest," I confessed. "But I brought teeth hygiene." I produced toothbrush and toothpaste like a man offering a sword in a flower shop. The room leaned in. Edo brushed with charcoal and tooth powders. A bristled brush was a novelty. The youngest Hangyoku, the one with the dimple that arrived half a beat before her smile, accepted it with the solemnity of receiving a scroll. "A tiny bamboo rake," she declared, "to scrape secrets from one's mouth." "Exactly," I said. "Each bristle digs out a lie." They laughed, and the sound threaded into the shamisen line. The skill here wasn't merely to speak, I realized. It was to spark, to layer a joke with a metaphor, to slide a proverb into a compliment until the guest's wallet came out by instinct. Edo's geisha were professionals who learned music, dance, chanoyu, tea ceremony, kodo, incense games, poetry forms from haiku to kyoka, and the weaponized pause. Yuki's fan could deliver a checkmate. "Play," said the okasan, and Yuki took up the shamisen, bachi pick poised. A rhythm of river stones, a melody built to hold sake aloft. "Can I record?" I asked before my 21st century brain could be arrested by my 18th century survival instinct. I held up my phone. Yuki cocked her head. I hit voice memos and captured a minute of Edo. When I tapped playback, the room froze as if a ghost had whistled. Yuki stared at the little rectangle producing her music. "A box that remembers," she said softly. Then, because geisha are born improvisers, she bowed to the box with a flourish that made the apprentices clap. "We shall be colleagues," she told it, "Yuki and the voice memo, coming soon to a scroll near you." When twilight poured ink into the lanes, we slipped out, 2 attendants in tow headed toward Nakanocho. Yoshiwara at night looks like the inside of a paper lantern, warm, flickering, filled with silhouettes practicing elegance. Rickshaw-men called, laughter perched in doorways, tobacco curled from kisaru pipes, a Portuguese habit turned Edo art form. Somewhere, a kabuki drum thudded like a heart. The Omen Gate loomed, a wooden teeth grin. You pass through to leave the law behind and enter the city of stories. The Hikeshi Fire Brigade's Matoi standards hung at the ready. Edo was called the City of Fires, its blazes so common they were poetically dubbed Edo's Flowers. On a high Hinomiyagura fire lookout, a man watched the city like a cat watches a teacup. "Stay near," Yuki said. "If the band patrol finds you after the bell, tell them you are a poet from Mido. Poets from Mido say anything." This I believed. In a tea house, Yuki showed me the rhythm of a conversation that costs a month's rice and yet feels like a gift. You do not brag about your fan. You let the guest notice how it folds like a secret. You do not show your wit like a blade. You wrap it in silk and let it bloom. And then, of course, I set the smartphone on the table for 1 second, and a young samurai, drunk on sake and the fact of his own sleeves, declared it a fox spirit trapped in the glass. The samurai, call him Sleeves, leaned in. "It glows," he said, "like kitsune-bi, fox fire." His friends, already at that delightful Edo phase between poetry and swordplay, leaned in too. "It's a Dutch mirror," I improvised. "From Nagasaki. Shows the soul. Sometimes the past. Sometimes the future." "Show me my soul," Sleeves demanded. "If it is empty, I shall pour in more sake." I flipped to the selfie camera. Sleeves glanced, saw his own flushed face and widened eyes, recoiled like he'd been presented with the bill. Yuki's fan hid a smile. "Aha," I said. "Your soul is surprised but handsome. 10 mon for the prognosis." He paid. Edo rule, charge for the laugh, then add tax for not getting arrested, but the rumor escaped faster than my dignity. By the time the Bangashira patrol drifted by, lanterns bobbing, clappers clicking, half the street knew a foxbox was showing souls. A patrolman peered in, suspicious. Yuki moved like water. "Honorable watchman," she said, pouring tea with the slope of Mount Fuji. "Would you help us settle a wager? My friend says the fire tower bell tolls 9 times at the hour. I say 7. You with such refined ears. By the time she'd braided a compliment into a question, into a sip, into a second, the patrolman had forgotten he'd been hunting foxes and was arguing about bells. Geisha, 1. Time police, 0. Back at the okiya, the youngest Hangyoku, the dimpled one, winced when she picked up the shamisen. A cut on her finger had turned angry, red spreading in a thin line toward her wrist. In Edo, a small infection could become a legend with a funeral. I felt the bottle of penicillin in my pack grow heavy like a curse and a prayer. I am not a doctor. I am a person who has watched too many medical dramas on flights. But Alexander Fleming would not exist for centuries. North of here, a farmer was probably inventing ramen by accident. I stared at the red line and thought about the butterfly effect performing a gymnastics routine in my stomach. Yuki watched me watching. "We are good at reading the face," she said quietly. "What do you carry?" "Medicine," I said, "from very far away." The Okasan arrived, ledger eyes assessing, clock mind ticking. "If you poison my girl, I will ruin your descendants," she said, not unkindly. "It fights fevers born of small wounds," I said, "taken over days. But it is strong, too strong for a world that isn't ready." The room had the hush of a tea ceremony just before the bowl turns in your hands. I set the bottle down like a confession. We talked it through with a sincerity that made time feel very thin. The risk of giving a thing the world didn't invent yet. The risk of a girl's fever climbing a ladder no one could pull down. The Okasan's jaw worked. She knew contracts, debts, men's tempers, women's chances. She weighed future ghosts and present fingers. "Half a capsule," she said finally. "Ground in water, twice a day. We keep the bottle hidden and pretend it is a new kind of kanpo herb from a monk with a sense of humor. You are the monk." I became the monk. We made the medicine. The girl, Suzu, I learned, slept. We sat with the bundle of everything I couldn't explain. "Tell a story," Yuki said softly. And I did. I told them about women in white coats who command rooms where beeping lights watch over dreams, about vaccines and washing hands and people who argue with soap. I did not claim my century was perfect. About medicine learned from plants, from molds, from mistakes. They listened, as if learning a new dance. I fell asleep to the careful pluck of a shamisen and a fever melting like frost on a lacquered tray. Edo wakes early. A bell tolled. A rooster somewhere remembered it was a cliché and tried to lean into it. The okiya flowed into morning like a school of fish changing direction together. Rice steamed, water hissed. A runner shouted news. A vendor sang about tofu with the gravitas of a sutra. We visited a Sento public bath, the women early, me later, after appropriate partitioning and a lecture from the Okasan that covered modesty, honor, and how one does not show the fox box to the bathing public. The baths were wooden, hot, perfect, the steam carrying whispers of cypress. Men spoke in low voices, comparing tobacco blends, complaining about Sankin Kotai, the system that forced daimyo to spend alternate years in Edo, a political leash braided with logistics. Overhead, the rafters had the scars of a city that burns and rebuilds and burns and rebuilds, stubborn as a proverb. Back at the okiya, Yuki combed tsubaki, camellia oil through her hair until it shone like a river at dusk. Suzu's fever had retreated, the red line paling like a scolded child. I did not cry. I did consider the ethics of crying. We practiced conversation. Yuki taught me to compliment without flattery. Your sleeve color and your story agree with each other. I taught Yuki to roll an English R, and she taught me to bow without apologizing with my entire soul. I brushed my teeth. Suzu giggled at the tiny rake. "Foreign prince," Yuki said, a nickname I would never live down. "Do you know our poems?" I offered a haiku that tried very hard and landed softly. Lanterns, paper skin floats a river down Nakanocho. Laugh, and time will wait. "Your season word is missing," she said, smiling, "but your heart is correct." When the fire came, it came like an old debt collector. Politely at first, then with a familiarity you resented. Someone's cook stove fell out with someone's curtain, and the wind decided to make a romance of it. Bells clanged. A runner's voice broke on the word, "Kaji, fire!" The Hikeshi appeared, acrobats with hooks and matoi standards, climbing into smoke that wanted to smuggle itself into your lungs. Edo's fire brigades fought by pulling down houses ahead of the flames, creating gaps, sacrificing wood to save wood. The okiya's women packed with speed born of practice, kimonos folded into miracles, shamisen cradled like infants, ledgers hugged like loaves of bread, makeup boxes that contained 100 tiny kingdoms. The Okasan's eyes were already counting routes. "Compass," I said, suddenly useful. Edo's lanes can turn you around in a poem. North became more than a theory. We moved with the stream toward the canal, the Omon gate huffing smoke like a dragon. "Light," Yuki said, and I pulled out the flashlight. It carved a tunnel through ash and astonishment. No one had time to accuse it of fox lineage. It was simply a blade of day. A child grabbed my sleeve and didn't let go until the bridge. I looked up, and in that stupid, beautiful way the world has of mixing frames, the moon hung pale over a sky that had tasted too much fire. And for a second, I thought of a ukiyo-e print that hadn't been carved yet. A wave, a mountain, a moon, and a line of people carrying their lives in boxes like small altars. I thought of Udamaro's courtesans with their sideways glances, of Basho's road, of Hokusai's future wave, that impossible triangle of foam and fate. Edo is a tinderbox, but its people move through it with a choreography made of resilience and sheer refusal. By dawn, the okiya still stood. The fire had exhausted itself half a dozen roofs away. Suzu slept with her shamisen in her arms. The Okasan, who had not blinked since last season, finally sat. "You will be gone soon," she said, not asking. "Yes," I said. My phone was a tired stone. My perfume had been adopted as linen sachets. My toothbrush had become a household legend. My heart had learned to bow. She considered me the way one considers a particularly brave beetle. "Take this," she said, and pressed a senjafuda, a paper name tag with the house crest, into my hand. "If you find a gate in your world with our name, you owe us a song." I wanted to leave a note that didn't change anything and changed everything. An impossible assignment. I wrote on the back of the senjafuda a single line. "The art is the person you become while you practice it." I doubt the kanji were perfect. I hoped the sentiment traveled. Yuki walked me to the edge of the quarter where the moats showed their teeth and the morning vendors were already making poetry out of daikon prices. She had a fan, of course, and with it a gesture that contained both a wave and a curtain call. "Will your little box remember me?" she asked. "It will," I said. "And if it forgets, I won't." "Good," she said. "Tell your century we were interesting, not just what some men said we were." "I will," I promised, and the weight of being exactly where you do not belong, but where you learn something true, made the air taste like new tea. She leaned in, not a kiss, wrong story, wrong assumptions, wrong quarter, but a conspiratorial, devastating whisper of perfume and camellia and laughter. "Also," she said, "you bow like a praying mantis. Practice." "I'll add it to my regimen," I said, "along with not calling people foxes." She laughed, and it was the same bell from last night and the same bell from 300 years in the future. The Okasan had said we sold taste. I had bought an idea of myself I liked better. Time travel is less a tunnel and more a misstep on a staircase you thought ended. I blinked, and the whine of cicadas turned into the hum of an air conditioner. The scent of agar wood smudged into laundry detergent. My tatami impression became the indentation on my apartment rug. My phone blinked awake with modern hunger. Yuki's shamisen line lived in voice memos, among grocery lists and lies I'd told myself about running more. On my desk sat the senjafuda. For a second, I hoped I had imagined it all, then feared I had, and then was grateful for the weight of paper and the faint impression of a thumb smeared with camellia oil. I showered, and the water hit like confession. I looked at my Bulgari and laughed. Somewhere in Tokyo, A subway train stitched the city to itself every 3 minutes. Somewhere, a small plaque marks the old omon. Somewhere, a tourist was told, incorrectly, that geisha are fancy dates. Somewhere, a scholar was translating a poem that had been translated a dozen times and never the same way twice. I opened a notebook and wrote everything down, not because the internet needed my Foxbox story, though hello, internet, but because forgetting is the sin time always forgives and we never should. I had not ruined the Edo-period that I knew of. I had given a girl a medicine that belonged to a world that deserved her. I had been taught how to compliment a sleeve. I had learned that the floating world doesn't float because it's trivial. It floats because it refuses to drown. I also, for the record, can now sit Caesar for almost 8 minutes before becoming a tragic poem. Here's my most provocative, least scandalous truth. The Edo-period is not a costume rack for fantasies. It's a living geometry of grace under rules. A geisha house is not wallpaper for someone else's story. It is the story. Women making art inside walls designed by men, finding leverage in poetry and survival, turning curfews into choreography. The Okasan's ledger is a poem about numbers and futures. Yuki's fan contains 10,000 decisions. Suzu's shamisen line is now trapped in my phone, which means it is loose in my head, which means it will appear when I'm stuck in traffic, and suddenly the car will be full of lantern light. If you ever land on a tatami in a room that smells of incense and stubborn laughter, remove your shoes, apologize to your knees, and tell the truth quickly. You're a fool who wandered into a better class. Offer your tiny rake. Keep your Foxbox in your sleeve. And if an okasan with eyes like a ledger asks whether you understand what is bought and sold here, say yes and mean it, because the art is the person you become while you practice it, including perhaps the art of leaving a place better than you found it, even if all you leave is a story that bows before it speaks.